In a village in Jiangxi, an elderly blind man lost 40,000 yuan. Facing the police, he insisted that the money was stolen by the village leader, a blind elderly man who cannot see. Why was he able to quickly pinpoint the suspect? It turns out this so-called leader isn't just anyone. His main role in the village is to transport sex workers on his motorcycle and deliver them to the homes of these elderly villagers. Each transaction costs 70 yuan, and the leader gets a cut of 20 yuan from the women. The blind elderly man who lost his money was one of this woman's clients. When he lost the money, he was in the middle of business with the woman. He heard a noise from the wardrobe halfway through. Didn't think much of it at the time, but later, upon checking, realized the money was gone. These words exposed a hidden secret in the village: that elderly people engage in sexual transactions, frequenting these difficult-to-monitor rural areas, especially among elderly who have been living alone for years. They are the main clients of these fallen women. Later, as their spouses aged, some married elderly also became clients. After the matter was exposed, it shocked many people. Some say in China, there are two types of people most ashamed to discuss sex. One is minors. The other is the elderly. Minors are supposed to remain ignorant, and the elderly are supposed to gradually abstain as they age. But the truth is, in places unseen by most, the desires and vitality of the elderly are often more vigorous than those of young people. Do your parents still have a sex life? The media once conducted such a survey among young people. The answers were almost unanimous. Nearly all young people believe that as parents age, well, they're pretty reserved, so they probably don't have a sex life anymore. Some say their parents have been sleeping in separate rooms for years to not disturb each other's sleep quality. Others say with advancing age, their bodies can't keep up in various ways. Intense physical activity could raise heart rate and blood pressure, which could be life-threatening for the elderly. From various perspectives, it seems like no sex life for the elderly is a foregone conclusion. But is this really the case, as young people imagine? Sociologists have conducted a survey specifically on elderly people's sex lives, slowly uncovering the veil of shame covering elderly people. Survey data shows that sexual activity among Chinese aged 61 to 80 has notably increased, and the demand for sex among the elderly is objectively present. 53% of elderly people still maintain a certain frequency of sexual activity. In a park in Ningbo, Zhejiang, there have been indecent services specifically targeting the elderly, provided by middle-aged women in their 40s and 50s. Their targets are elderly men who come to the park for walks. 10 yuan for a touch. 80 yuan for sleeping together. They would sit on the elderly men's laps directly, hold their hands and touch their bodies. If there wasn't strong resistance, they would proceed to bolder actions until the transaction was successfully completed. Don't talk to strangers. Expose the naked truth of elderly people's sex lives to everyone. In Beijing's Changpu River Park, there's a gathering of elderly men and women. They're not here for a stroll, but for matchmaking. The elderly here are anything but reserved. Their goals are clear, and there's no beating around the bush in finding a partner. Once they find a suitable one, they get straight to the point. When facing the camera, 65-year-old Wu Tian is not shy either. He openly states that his only requirement for a partner is good health. By good health, he means not just eating and sleeping well, but also being able to satisfy each other's needs. When strolling in the park, Wu Tian doesn't beat around the bush when he meets a woman he likes. He would directly bring her home. Hu Tian, 65, has a 45-year-old girlfriend, and they've been together for over a year. Hu Tian stands out because he's not afraid to speak openly. During interviews, he frequently mentions sex. When asked about the most romantic thing he's ever done, Hu Tian didn't hesitate to say, "It was in the Schiller Cinema. We did it right there." When asked about the craziest thing he's done while in love, 4 times a day, Hu Tian also mentioned that his girlfriend is equally passionate. They have a very active sex life. The sexual lives of elderly people are wilder than we imagine. This kind of openness is blunt. Some netizens commented that Hu Tian is just an old rogue. Even if he has grandchildren, they wouldn't let him take care of them. Fear of bad influence. Others said such an old man is just used to his ways. A playboy growing old. But in fact, Hu Tian is a very sentimental person. He always carries a civil servant card with him, with a photo of his deceased wife who passed away many years ago. When he misses his wife, he takes it out and looks at it. During his wife's illness, he never left her side. Always by her side. After his wife passed away, he lived alone in the empty house. Everywhere is filled with traces of saving people, making people feel deeply saddened. So Hu Tian spends more time in the park, making friends and finding girlfriends, rather than being promiscuous. It's more about coping with sadness and loneliness. But it's quite obvious. Elderly people's sexual lives, even though now out in the open, are still hard to accept. Just as everyone believes children should remain innocent and ignorant, elderly people should be dignified and serious. As if once they reach a certain age, any needs become greed and extravagance. When these needs are voiced, desires long hidden in darkness are exposed. Instead of receiving blessings and understanding, they are met with attacks and condemnation. Isn't this inherent impression a kind of stereotype and confinement? Confining the thoughts of elderly people, confining their desires, and even confining the later years of their lives in freedom. Whether elderly or young, sexual needs are not just human nature, but instinct. Growing old doesn't mean people become heartless and desireless. Consciousness brings desires. This is as normal as eating and drinking. Influenced by traditional thinking, Chinese people have always been shy about discussing sex. Silence is not the best way to solve problems. On the contrary, this silence is breeding bigger issues. According to the World Health Organization, in 2019, HIV infections among elderly people in China increased 5-fold compared to the previous 9 years, with elderly men accounting for 70% of cases. 102-year-old Grandpa Chen from Jiangxi is one of them. He lies thin and frail in a hospital bed, his children crying by the window. After repeated questioning by doctors, the source of infection was finally identified as soliciting prostitutes. Elderly people seeking prostitutes is nothing new. This problem is magnified in front of widowed and disabled elderly. When hungry, people eat. When thirsty, they drink. When desires are full, they seek release. With empty beds, they can only satisfy themselves through illegal means. But soliciting prostitutes will inevitably be criticized by many, so they can only remain silent, regretting deeply only after diagnosis. However, soliciting prostitutes is just one channel of HIV transmission. In Beijing, Mr. Li, in his 50s, met many sexual partners through square dancing. In total, he had sexual relations with over 50 women. After a while, Mr. Li began feeling unwell, and upon visiting a hospital, he was diagnosed with HIV. Being diagnosed with HIV not only makes one lose face, but also brings shame to family and children. So Mr. Lee chose to handle things discreetly, never going to a formal hospital for treatment, which made the situation worse. Several women who had relations with Mr. Lee were also subsequently diagnosed with HIV. But such matters are inevitably criticized by many. Due to the taboo surrounding sex, many elderly people dare not discuss it or even consider safety measures. If seen buying condoms, they could be labeled as promiscuous old folks, and gossip could spread like wildfire. Not to mention, some elderly have limited knowledge about condoms, believing that being old means no longer needing protection due to infertility. The lack of sexual and safety knowledge has become a breeding ground for misunderstanding and troubles, disturbing the peaceful later years these elderly should enjoy. Thus, the elderly's silence on sex, and the younger generation's disregard for the sexual lives of the elderly, doesn't mean the problem doesn't exist. They may be trapped in shame, unable to confront their own needs, yet unable to resist the laws of nature. Hiding and covering up unknowingly brews more serious consequences. In South Korea, the film The Backrest Lady also exposed the awkwardness of elderly people's later years to the world. 65-year-old Soo-young is a sex worker. Her clients aren't young people, but mostly elderly with white hair. Some are widowed, some bedridden for long periods. These elderly people share a common loneliness, with nowhere to turn emotionally. Gradually, Soo-young sees her own future in these elderly. Rather than providing sexual services to the elderly, it's more about providing emotional and psychological support. Many elderly people, due to physical reasons, find it difficult to engage in transactions. They only need Soo-young to accompany them in chat, rather than saying they need sex. It's more accurate to say they need companionship. They need love. These lonely elderly people, carrying emotions they can't place in bodies that are gradually failing, live like walking corpses. No matter how age increases, being human means having similar desires and needs. Elderly people are a group with normal psychological and physiological needs. These needs shouldn't be shackled by moral judgments and shame. Their lives shouldn't be confined by the standard of being chaste and indifferent. After a busy half-life, in their later years, they need emotional support. They need attention. They need companionship. They need love. And they need younger people to give more understanding and warmth. I hope everyone can enjoy their life as they age. Subscribe to Buddha Zen Wisdom. I wish you a happy life here.